To find your true strength, you must first be willing to let the old version of yourself burn away. Witness the powerful cinematic stories of rebirth and the incredible resilience of the human spirit. Subscribe today and find the fire to start your own brand new chapter. She signed my name on the lease renewal. My sister didn't even look up from her laptop when she said it. She just slid the paper across the kitchen counter like it was a grocery list, her coffee going cold beside her MacBook, the morning light making everything in her Scottsdale kitchen look clean and expensive, and nothing like my life. I stared at the signature, the loops and angles of my own name written in someone else's hand. "That's your handwriting," I said. She finally looked up. Her reading glasses were perched at the end of her nose, which meant she was trying to look reasonable and not condescending. She almost succeeded. The landlord needed it by noon. "You were at work. I handled it. I handle things," she said. That was always her line. When our mother got sick, she handled the medical forms. When our father's estate went into probate, she handled the lawyers. When the family storage unit in Tucson came up for renewal every year for the past 4 years, she handled the paperwork. She had been handling things my entire adult life, and somehow every time she handled something, I ended up with less than I started with. "The lease is in my name now," she continued. "That means the liability is on you. That means if anything goes wrong with that unit, you're the one the county comes after. I'm protecting myself, Nora. You should be thanking me. My name is Nora. I am 31 years old. I work as a licensed home inspector in Phoenix, Arizona, which means I spend my days walking through other people's houses looking for what's wrong beneath the surface. Faulty wiring behind new drywall, mold colonies living under fresh paint, termite damage dressed up in crown molding. I make my living understanding that beautiful things can hide catastrophic failures and that ugly things can sometimes be structurally sound. My sister's name is Diana. She is 38. She handles things. When our parents died within 14 months of each other, my mother from a stroke and my father from the grief that followed it, Diana stepped forward before the funeral flowers had wilted. She was the executor. She was the oldest. She was the one who had stayed local while I was finishing my degree in Flagstaff, and that geography became her leverage. By the time I drove back to Phoenix with my diplomas still in a cardboard tube, the important decisions had already been made. The house in Arcadia where we grew up went to Diana because she had been paying property taxes on it for 2 years while I was in school. The investment accounts went to Diana because she had been the one managing them. The Scottsdale condo that my parents had bought as a rental property went to Diana because she had been collecting the rent and using it to maintain the estate. What came to me was the storage unit, 1,200 square feet of corrugated steel on the edge of an industrial complex in Tucson, 3 hours from everything I knew. My parents had been paying the lease on it for over a decade. Diana called it the junk drawer. She called it the place where they put things they didn't want to deal with. She said it with the particular tone of someone doing you a favor by offloading something worthless, and I had been too exhausted and too grief-soaked to look closely at what I was accepting. That was 3 years ago. I had been to the unit exactly twice. Both times I stood at the rolling door and looked at the wall of labeled boxes and furniture draped in moving blankets, and told myself I would deal with it later. Later kept getting pushed. The lease kept renewing. Diana kept handling the paperwork and charging me for the administrative fee she had invented, $40 a month, that I paid without question, because questioning Diana had never once in my life produced anything except a longer lecture. Then she signed my name on the lease renewal without asking, and something in me went very still. Not angry. Not yet. Still. I took the paper off the counter. I folded it once and put it in my bag. "I'll handle the next one myself," I said. She looked at me over her reading glasses for a long moment. Then she went back to her laptop. "Fine," she said. "It's your problem anyway." I drove to Tucson on a Saturday in October when the desert was finally cooling down, and the light had that low golden quality that makes everything look like a memory you haven't made yet. I had taken the day off work, which Diana would have called irresponsible, and I had not told her I was going, which she would have called suspicious. I didn't care about either of those things. I had the key on my ring, the spare that my mother had pressed into my hand the last time I saw her, whispering that there were things in there that Diana didn't know about and that I should look when I had the time. I had not looked. I had carried the key for 3 years like a stone in my pocket. The storage facility was in a flat industrial stretch south of downtown Tucson, the kind of area where the buildings all looked the same, and the address numbers were the only way to tell them apart. I found the unit at the end of the 3rd row. The rolling door was orange with rust at the corners. A combination padlock had been added below the standard lock, one I did not have a code for. I stood in front of it for a moment. Then I called Diana. "There's a second lock on the unit," I said when she picked up. "And? I don't have the combination." A pause. "That one's mine. I put it on when I renewed the lease last spring. There were some things I needed to keep secured." "Your things. In my unit." "Our parents' things, Nora. I was keeping them safe. Give me the combination, Diana. Another pause. Longer this time. The kind she used when she was deciding how much truth to portion out. I'll come down next weekend. We can go through it together. I'm here now. I know you're there now. That's why I'm saying next weekend. There are things in there that need context. Things you wouldn't understand without me there to explain. I've been a licensed home inspector for 6 years, I said. I think I can handle a storage unit. She made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Fine. You want to stand in the dark and stare at old furniture? Be my guest. The combination is my birthday. Month and year. I hung up and turned the dial. The lock opened. The rolling door went up with a sound like a held breath finally released, and the smell hit me first. Dust, yes, and the dry paper smell of old documents, but beneath that something else. Something that did not belong in a storage unit. Cool air, temperature controlled, faintly chemical, like the inside of a museum. That was wrong. Storage units in Tucson didn't maintain temperature. They baked in the summer and went cold in the winter, and people stored their furniture accordingly. There was no reason for this unit to smell like a climate-controlled room. I stepped inside. The front section looked exactly like what Diana had described. Boxes stacked on wire shelves, each one labeled in my mother's neat handwriting. Christmas decor. Tax records 1998 to 2007. Nora school projects. The furniture I remembered from my childhood. The wingback armchair from my father's study, my mother's sewing table wrapped in a moving blanket, the mirror from the front hallway. Still wearing a coat of dust like a gray veil, I walked to the back. There was a wall. Not the corrugated steel rear wall of the unit. A wall built inside the unit. Smooth drywall painted the same cream color as my parents' kitchen, running floor to ceiling, and the full 12-foot width of the space. It divided the unit roughly in half. There was a door in it, an interior door with a standard residential knob, the kind you'd find in a house. It was locked, but it was not a padlock. It was a keyed knob, and the key my mother had pressed into my hand 3 years ago slid into it as cleanly as a memory. The door swung open. The cold air rolled over me in a wave. The back half of the unit had been converted. The walls were insulated. The floor had been covered in sealed concrete, and a compact climate system hummed quietly in the upper corner, the kind used for archival storage. Along the left wall, flat storage drawers had been built into custom cabinetry, the kind you see in museum print rooms. Along the right wall, paintings hung on a system of sliding racks that could be pulled out one by one. Large paintings, each one in its own frame, each frame wrapped at the corners in acid-free padding. I pulled out the first rack. I am a home inspector. I know construction. I know materials. I know how to estimate the age of things by looking at how they're built. I do not know fine art. I did not grow up in galleries. My parents were a civil engineer and a middle school librarian, and the art on their walls had been prints from the museum gift shop and a watercolor of the Grand Canyon my father bought at a roadside stand in 1987, so I did not recognize what I was looking at. But I recognized that it was old. The crackler in the paint, the specific way the varnish had yellowed at the edges, the weight of the frame when I tilted the rack. I pulled out the second rack, then the third. Different styles, different subjects, different sizes, but all of them carrying that same quality of age and careful preservation. I opened the flat drawers. Inside, protected between sheets of glassine paper, were works on paper, sketches, prints, what looked like architectural drawings, all of them handled with the same archival care as the paintings. My mother was a middle school librarian. What she was also, which I had not known until that moment, was the daughter of a man who had spent 30 years quietly collecting American art before he died, and left his collection to his youngest daughter, my mother, in a will that Diana had been the executor of. I sat down on the sealed concrete floor. I did not have cell service inside the converted space. I walked back to the front of the unit and called the only person I could think of who might know what I was looking at. Her name was Priya. We had been friends since college, and she had gone on to get her master's in art history before pivoting to insurance appraisal for high-value collections. I had helped her move twice. She owed me. She picked up on the second ring. I need you to tell me if I'm losing my mind, I said. When is it not that with you? I described what I was looking at, the climate control, the sliding racks, the paintings, the works on paper. I described the style of the frames, the condition of the surfaces, the labels I could see on the backs of some of the works, small handwritten cards in a script I did not recognize. Priya was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Read me one of the labels exactly." I went back inside and read her the card from the first painting. The name on it meant nothing to me. The date was 1923. She was quiet for longer this time. Then she said, "Nora, I need you to take photographs of everything and send them to me right now. Every label, every painting, the back of every work on paper. I need you to not touch anything with bare hands, and I need you to do it in the next 20 minutes before I lose my nerve and tell you I can't be involved in whatever this is." "What is it?" I said. "I don't know yet," she said. "But if what you're describing is what I think it might be, you need to call your own lawyer before you call anyone else." It took Priya 4 days to come back to me with a number. She drove to Tucson herself rather than deliver it over the phone. She stood in the converted back room with her own flashlight and her own white cotton gloves, and she moved through the space with the focused silence of someone doing math in her head. I stood in the doorway and watched her, and tried to read her face and got nothing. She came out after 40 minutes and sat down on the box labeled Christmas decor in the front of the unit and took off her gloves one finger at a time. "Okay," she said. "Here's what I can tell you as someone who is not your appraiser and whose name does not appear on any document related to this collection." I said okay. 22 works across the paintings and the works on paper, based on the provenance cards, which are consistent with private collection documentation from that era, and based on visual examination, this appears to be a cohesive collection of American regionalist and American scene paintings from approximately 1915 to 1945. The condition is exceptional. Whoever set up this storage system knew exactly what they were doing. She looked at me steadily. "Conservative auction estimate for the collection as a whole," she said, "based on comparable sales from the last 5 years, is somewhere between $8 and $12 million. If there are 2 or 3 works in here that are by the names I think they might be by, the ceiling could be closer to 18. The air in the unit was cool and still, and smelled like careful preservation. My grandfather collected them," I said. "My mother inherited them. Her name was on the will." Priya nodded slowly. "And the executor of your mother's estate," she said, "was Diana," I finished. "Diana who had handled things. Diana who had seen the estate through probate and signed all the documents and told me the storage unit was just the junk drawer. Just the things they couldn't deal with. Just a burden I was welcome to take off her hands. Diana who had put her own padlock on the door inside my unit. Diana who had been renewing the lease and paying the climate control system and keeping the collection preserved while telling me it was worthless. She knew," I said. "She knew," Priya agreed. "She's been maintaining the storage conditions. She's been paying for a serious HVAC system on a storage unit she told you was a junk drawer. You don't do that for Christmas decorations." I thought about the $40 a month she charged me as an administrative fee. I thought about the lease she had renewed in my name without asking. I thought about standing in the doorway of this place twice in 3 years, and never walking to the back because Diana had always been so offhand about it, so dismissive, that I had absorbed her description of it as fact. She was waiting, I realized. She was waiting until she could figure out how to move it, without me finding out. She maintained it because the collection losing value would have been losing her money. But she kept my name on the lease because if anything went wrong, if anyone came asking, the unit belonged to me, not her. She had engineered it so the liability was mine and the asset was hers. I did not call Diana. I called a probate attorney. Her name was Claudette, and she had been practicing estate law in Arizona for 22 years. And when I explained the situation, she made a sound that was not quite surprise, and not quite satisfaction, but somewhere in between. I sent her the photographs Priya had taken. I sent her the original probate filing from my mother's estate, which I had a copy of because I had been CC'd on all the documentation, which Diana had never thought to stop because she had never believed I was paying attention. Claudette called me back in 3 hours. "Your mother's estate inventory," she said, "does not include a personal property collection. There is no mention of artwork, drawings, or archival materials of any kind. The inventory lists the house contents and the financial accounts and the 2 vehicles and stops there. It was omitted," I said. "Deliberately omitted from a probate filing is a serious allegation," she said carefully. "What I can tell you is that if your mother's grandfather's collection was passed to her through his will, and if that collection was present in property your mother controlled at the time of her death, it should have been inventoried as part of her estate. And if it wasn't, then the executor had an obligation to disclose it. And if the executor failed to disclose material assets in a probate proceeding," she said, "that is a matter for the court." "I want to understand my options," I said. She told me. Clearly, in order, with specific attention to timing and documentation. I took notes on the back of an envelope because I had not thought to bring a notepad. I wrote down the words probate fraud and fiduciary duty and estate recovery, and I underlined each of them twice. Then I did something Diana had never expected me to do, because she had spent 20 years making sure I understood that I was not capable of handling things. I hired Claudette. I retained Priya formally as a consulting appraiser. I contacted the storage facility and had the emergency contact information updated so that Diana could no longer be reached on my behalf. I changed the locks on the outer door, both of them, to keys that only I had. I documented every inch of the space with a professional photographer Priya recommended. I had the collection formally appraised by 2 independent houses. one in Phoenix and one in New York, and I received their reports within 6 weeks. The collection appraised at $14 million. 3 of the works were by artists whose names Priya had suspected. The centerpiece of the collection, a large-scale oil painting that had been on the back rack, was by an artist whose work had not appeared at public auction in over 30 years, and whose whereabouts in private collections had been the subject of academic articles. The painting alone carried an insurance estimate of $4 million. Claudette filed the petition. Diana called me 48 hours after she was served. I did not answer. I let it go to voicemail, and her voice on the recording was a version of Diana I had never heard before, less handling and more unraveling. She said there had been a misunderstanding. She said she had been protecting the collection, that she had always intended to disclose it when the time was right, that I had to understand the complexity of the estate administration, that I was making a mistake by going to lawyers without talking to her first. I listened to the voicemail once. Then I forwarded it to Claudette. The legal process was not fast, and it was not simple, and there were months of document production and depositions, and a mediation session, at which Diana arrived with her own attorney and a manila folder full of explanations that Claudette dismantled calmly and completely over the course of 4 hours. Diana had records showing she had paid for the climate control system. What she did not have was any documentation that she had ever disclosed the collection's existence to me, to the probate court, or to any independent party. She had maintained it in secret. She had listed the unit in my name. She had charged me $40 a month for the privilege of owning something she was keeping from me. The settlement took 14 months. Diana did not go to prison. Probate fraud cases in Arizona rarely result in criminal charges when the parties reach civil resolution, which Claudette explained to me with the steady tone of someone managing expectations. What Diana received instead was a judgment requiring her to disgorge the value of the concealed assets, which meant that the proceeds of any sale of the collection, above and beyond costs, belonged to the estate and were to be distributed according to my mother's actual wishes, as established by the probate court. My mother's actual wishes, as the court found them, were consistent with what the original will of my grandfather had intended. The collection was to go to her children equally. Diana had known this. She had known it when she filed the original probate inventory and left the collection off of it. The collection sold at auction 8 months after the settlement. The New York house handled it. I flew out for the preview and stood in a white room with climate-controlled air and watched people in quiet clothing study the paintings my grandfather had spent his life acquiring, and I thought about my mother pressing a key into my hand and telling me to look when I had the time. She had not told me what I would find. She had not told me why she hadn't handled it herself. I think she trusted me to figure it out in my own time, and I think she knew, in the way that people know things they don't say aloud, that I would need it more than Diana would. The auction total was $16.3 million. After legal fees and appraisal costs and auction house commissions, my share was just over $5 million. I know what Diana expected when I opened that envelope with the settlement figures. She expected me to be overwhelmed. She expected me to be grateful for whatever portion I received, the way I had always been quietly grateful for the scraps of handling she had allowed me. She had built her entire understanding of me on the premise that I did not pay attention, that I was too trusting, that I would always take her word for what things were worth. She was not wrong that I had been those things. She was wrong that I would stay them. With my portion of the settlement, I bought out the remaining lease on the family home in Arcadia, which had been placed in a trust as part of Diana's asset freeze during the litigation. The house went back on the open market during the proceedings, and I purchased it at fair value with my own money, and I moved back into the room where I had grown up, in the house where my parents had lived, surrounded by the print reproductions from the museum gift shop that my grandfather would have found modest and my mother had loved exactly as they were. I did not sell the key. It sits on my kitchen counter now, on a small dish near the window where the morning light comes in. Some mornings I look at it when I'm drinking my coffee, and I think about my mother in her last weeks, pressing it into my hand with that particular look she had. The one that meant she was trusting me with something she couldn't say in words. She knew who I was. She knew I would look when I was ready. She knew that looking carefully at what other people call worthless is, in fact, the only skill you ever really need. Diana called me one more time after the auction results were published. I picked up this time, because I had learned by then that there are conversations you have not to change anything, but to close a door completely. She said, "You didn't have to do it the way you did it. I thought about $40 a month for 3 years. I thought about my name on a lease for an asset I didn't know I had. I thought about standing at that rolling door twice and almost walking away. I know," I said. Then I said goodbye, and I meant it, and I hung up, and the morning light came through the window and landed on the key in its dish, and I finished my coffee, and I went to work.